And you clearly have pedigree in bookmaking and online betting. So is Waterhouse VC really, an example of sticking to your knitting, investing in what you know?
Yeah, we concentrate purely on the gaming wagering sector and on the online part of it. And so where we really focus is in the picks and shovels on the B2B space, and not because we don't understand being an operator. We've operated businesses forever, but we feel that it's less understood, the actual supplies. So that's where we focus, and it's always been a great industry, the gambling industry. Like since the beginning of time, people have gambled, but you're seeing now in regulated, mature markets like Australia and the UK, the big players are still growing 20, 30% a year. Like Sportsbet grew their EBIT like 80-something% in the last year. But you're seeing this tremendous growth in the US, 100% year-on-year growth from any of those operators. And it's exciting to be part of the industry at such a high growth period.
You mentioned picks and shovels. Just flesh that out a little bit, because we hear that sort of thrown around a lot. What do you mean?
Well, all the operators there are trying to get scale. And so they've got a big issue. They've got to spend the marketing money to get the customers in to grow their revenues. And you always hear that this scale will win, the dominant operators will win. Ross was just talking about it before. The big players are going to be the ones standing. And so all of those operators, they need suppliers, they need data feeds, they need vision, they need affiliate marketing services. So what we think about is, during my time as CEO of William Hill here in Australia, is what products do we really need to get the business going? And we had 200 products in the pipeline at any one time. And what we try and focus on is the businesses that are going to be key to those large operators like a FanDuel or DraftKings, and basically invest in them early and then help them expand and get contracts in the US market.
Now, I'm quite happy if you guys go global. Or is that a key part of investing in this thematic?
I think if you think about the market, let's say it is around a $500 billion revenue market gambling globally. The Australian market's $30 billion. Call it 10 to 15% is now online. So there's a massive shift to online still to go, as you mentioned. But US is only a $6 billion market and a population size 8 times, 10 times the size. So for us, our focus is basically, it doesn't matter if it's listed, unlisted, we want to be in the high growth parts of the market. And that's sort of where we're focused. I think so. I think your point in the Australian operators, Australia and the UK have got a blueprint of how to be successful in the online space. So I think if you're looking at companies that you really want to be in the companies that have got exposure to online, because that's where high growth is, and that have got the ability to expand into the growth markets such as the US and Australia. I work with the guys at PointsBet, Sam Swinnell, Johnny Aiken. You can't get better operators than those guys. And guys like them that have got the experience in the Australian market, the UK market, they're going to be a force in the US. And so to us, we see that it's higher risk, some of the unlisted opportunities, but also higher growth. But I think there's plenty of growth. The fact that scale operators are growing revenues 20, 30% in the Australian market, and they're growing at 100% in the US market, and they're listed, there's still plenty of growth and opportunity in listed.
Do casinos interest you in and of themselves in any way? Or what is the interplay between some of those picks and shovel businesses and the more traditional gaming enterprises, if we think of them that way?
So casinos purely standalone. I just don't have enough expertise in that area. I've been only in the online space. But what's interesting about the US is that these casinos have the ability for licensing in different states. So they have a lot of leverage to partner up. Ross mentioned BetMGM, and you're talking about like the Caesars William Hill deal, and you're seeing that a lot of these operators are partnering with very good online operators. And so they can definitely, like you saw what Penn have done, their traditional land-based casino operator, they've done this deal with Barstool. Very interesting in terms of their cost per acquisition and what they're able to do. So I think they're investable. It's just for us to be interested in them, online has to be a large segment and a large growing segment, and they have to be partnering or showing the ability that they can really grow and be dominant in that online sector. And for us, being invested in the B2B space, well, there's growth whether they partner with an MGM, a FanDuel, a DraftKings. We just want to make sure that they get the right contracts and are able to grow their B2B product.
BetMakers is obviously one of them as well. Picks and shovel sort of opportunity. Unlisted, where are you seeing the real, like what characteristics does an unlisted business have to have specifically in that B2B market to attract you, Tom?
Yeah, look, the companies in the B2B space, we're very much looking at affiliate businesses. So businesses that can get customers very cheaply for the large operators. you're seeing that these large operators are spending, FanDuel spent $400 million in the last half in the US in marketing.
Okay.
So their cost per acquisition is an issue. You know, not FanDuel or standalone. All the operators need to make sure their cost per acquisition stays low and they can acquire customers. So we think affiliate businesses that can get large traffic volume, you can buy some of them at 4 to 5 times earnings at the moment. So we're focusing on those type of businesses.
So just to interrupt, sorry, so you're also seeing this as it's valuation, so you can get them a lot cheaper in that
A lot
world.
cheaper, and we think that they're valued on their European businesses or their Australian businesses, which have basically, they're very mature. We think there's going to be a need for affiliate style businesses in the US. We're looking at exchanges, no exchange, obviously Betfair coming out of that market. We think there's an opportunity for an exchange, a major exchange player to come into the market. So we're looking at those type of businesses. And we love data feed, like BetMakers we love that business because we think that if you can supply key data and especially data that increases the product offering, but also the margin for operators is very interesting for us. So anything that, as an operator, if I was running one of those businesses, what are the key problems that I would have to try and grow that business, and then try and find businesses that solve those problems. And that's what we spend our time doing.
Your one big bet, in case we haven't made it clear, is that horse betting is going to be massive in the US.
The reason for that is that the margin's very low for the operators in the US. They're operating somewhere between 2 and 6%, and with all the taxes that have come and are coming, you need to increase that margin over time, and there's just not enough product. So NFL only goes for, call it 18, 20 weeks of the season. NBA finishes for a 3-month block. You really need to have ongoing product like we have in Australia, and iGaming solving it in, call it half the states that are opened up. But in a lot of the states, they just don't have enough product and enough high margin product. So we think that fixed odds horse racing is going to solve a big issue for operators there. And that's why we're so excited by BetMakers, because the operators are going to be desperate for increased product, but they're also going to be desperate for a product that has a much higher margin, a 12 to 15% margin. So we think it's a real filler product. We think it's amazing for the horse racing industry because suddenly in New Jersey and other states like that, they're going to be able to bet on Randwick and Flemington. And all the different great racing around the world.
Because, sorry, just to interrupt again, this is one thing that I think that, I will keep hammering home, but Australian investors don't necessarily, I mean, coming from Canada even, migrating to Australia 15, 20 years ago, I was floored by how big horse racing is here.
It's huge, and it's because, firstly, we don't have iGaming, online iGaming in Australia. We don't have in-play sports. So it's a real product filler, and also we've traditionally come up with it. But what we found in 10 years as an operator is that people might come in for their NFL or they come in for their NBA. They come in for the sport that they want, but they want to be entertained for a lot longer period. So you need to have constant product. And so it's amazing that here the most popular sport was NBA. You'd think NRL or AFL would be huge. But the reason why NBA was so big is, firstly, it's a great betting product, but secondly, there was wall-to-wall product during the season. They play 80 games a season, there's 30 teams. It's unlimited product. And so we think that racing solves that issue, especially in the states that don't have iGaming, and we think it could be very big.
Regulation, we have to talk about regulation. Higher taxes. What are the risks associated with your one big call that fixed odd horse racing is going to be huge in the States?
Well, it's only New Jersey's the first state
Yeah.
that's allowed it. So obviously it's got to roll out into the other states that don't, especially the ones that don't have iGaming, but all the other states. But we think that the fact that BetMakers was able to do that 10-year deal with New Jersey is a real blueprint, and it's a win-win for operators. It's a win-win for the racing industry and also for tax revenue. So we are more than hopeful that it will roll out in many other states, and basically New Jersey will be a blueprint of what success looks like. And it's a huge thing for the racing industry. If the racing industry globally can have US bettors betting on it rather than betting on iGaming, what an amazing win for the fact that, I don't know, New South Wales Racing and the AJC or ATC can get revenue from US bettors on Randwick and Hawkesbury and Kembla. It's terrific.
Mm-hmm. Tom, when you're thinking about unlisted opportunities, what type of time frame are you thinking of for an investment horizon?
Oh no, we're all very, very long term. So we want to be in businesses that are going to be part of the long-term ecosystem of the global gambling market. So, and specifically the US. So we don't go, we're going to invest and then we're going to sell when they list, or we want to be a long-term holder. Now, if the valuation gets amazingly silly and they can't execute on what they're pitching and what we believe they can do, well, then that's a different story. But we're not, oh, well, let's pick one and try and get a quick sale. It's we're going to businesses that we think are going to be, whether it's the major exchange or the major fixed odd racing supplier or the major affiliate businesses, we want to be a long-term holder in those businesses and really be part of the journey, because we think that just now, I remember in 2002, 2003, I was sort of a whippersnapper at the races and they're like, oh, well, you missed the online, Mark Reed and all these trailblazers in the NT and you've missed this online thing. And it's still, the big sales in Australia didn't happen until 2013, 2014, 2015. Well, that was 15, 16 years in, and we're 3 years into the US market. And literally only less than half the states have legalized, but in terms of actually operating, well, PointsBet have got another 11 states still to open up that they've been allowed to go into. It's just so early in this space, and we want to be part of that journey for the next 10, 15 years and really ride it out.
Well, you've got this stake in BetMakers, but it didn't come about in the most obvious ways. So tell us what you know and love about this company and how you became involved with BetMakers to start.
Well, I just believed in Todd's vision, the CEO. He just has an amazing vision for how the global racing landscape will play out, and that data is key, both from a regulator's point of view, but also an operator's point of view. And the fact that he bought some key assets that were able to improve from an integrity point of view, in terms from a fee collection, but also take a lot of cost and effort out from an operator. I saw from my time running the William Hill Australia business here, is that they solve big issues for us. And then when I saw his vision and also listened to the board, Matt Davey, who's been extremely successful in the space, what they planned for taking on the US market, I thought that the opportunity there was unlimited potential. And that was why I was so excited to be a part of it and to invest in the business.
So you've actually, been using the technology, which is just...
Yeah, well, William Hill in Australia, we used BetMakers like data technology, and so I was able to experience it firsthand, and that was exciting. I love the picks and shovels it's still a great business in the Australian market, but the fact that they've been able to expand through acquisition globally now, but especially with their focus in the US, that New Jersey 10-year deal, that was a game changer for us in terms of what that business can ultimately become. We look at businesses like Sports-Radar and Sports Genius that are $3 billion to $10 billion US companies that are competing for sports rights. And we see that this is the one-out version of that in racing, in horse racing. And I hadn't thought of something as amazing as controlling that bit of the ecosystem. But when I listened to Todd and his plans for the future, it was very compelling.
It's not making a profit. That doesn't matter.
No, but it's growing its core revenue before the acquisition, its revenue 100% year on year. And it's a business that doesn't need a lot of cash, and it's got 120 million in cash. So it's not like these sports providers that need to go and do massive deals with the NFL or the NBA. It doesn't really have a need for cash. So I think you've got the organic growth of the expanding of the US market, and you've got 120 million in the kitty to make some really savvy acquisitions, and they've done that. They're buying businesses for 1.5 times revenue, and they're trading at a much bigger revenue multiple than that. So they're buying those businesses well, and also they're buying businesses and not spending a lot of money and getting core assets like they did with Dynamic Odds business, the Feeds business. They've just bought 2 other smaller businesses, but they're just adding on capability all the time. And that's very important for the operators. They're just making it easier for the operators, and at the same time, they're making the racing industry better off. And I love in an ecosystem where you're making both sides better off at the same time.
And so, and we'll get to Todd Buckingham, we'll be bringing him in just a sec, but if you think about the trajectory that BetMakers is on, given your one big call that fixed odd horse betting will be massive in the States in terms of online sports betting, where is BetMakers on its trajectory?
I think BetMakers is Sports-Radar and Sports Genius. Sports-Radar's listing, and call it a 10 billion US company. It's in a very competitive space in sports betting. They've got to buy those rights. BetMakers, they're controlling that racing ecosystem. So I think that racing may not be as big in the US as sports, because obviously you've got in-play sports, and sports is huge in the US, but I think racing can be a key part of it, and BetMakers will be at the centre of it.
BetMakers made what some called an audacious bid for part of Tabs Corp's business. As an investor in BetMakers, are you wanting to see acquisitions that are more in line with the sort of tech stack and growing the business that way? Or, you ready for BetMakers to expand in that type of M&A environment?
We think that the US growth is an amazing story that will increase BetMakers' valuation over a long period of time as they grow that out. But as Todd mentioned, BetMakers, you've got Todd, who's done such an amazing job growing that business, but you've got Matt Tripp, who there isn't anyone better in the industry in Australia, and you've got Matt Davey from a US and global gaming point of view. You haven't got anyone better. So I just enjoy being in the hands of people that understand and know the industry and have had success in the industry. And whether it's Tabcorp and all the data and the vision and all the other stuff, the product they have, I know they can enhance that. And I know Matt Tripp, running a business like that, makes that a completely different business. But I like the fact that BetMakers so far has been so disciplined. They've got 120 million in cash. You don't hear of a deal every second day. They're disciplined, and if the right opportunity comes up, they grab it. And you saw that with Sportech and...
Right. Here's another one, and I believe you're across PlayUp Australia, Tom. This is from Bart. He says, thanks, Bart. How is PlayUp Australia looking in the market? Are they a smaller player potentially worth investing in? They've just launched in New Jersey, I see, and have a number of licenses in other states.
Yeah, so PlayUp's an interesting business. It's got, I think, 6 licenses now in the US. It's got a social gaming business. It's got a digital token. It's got a media company business involved in it. So it's got lots of assets that are very interesting. It owns its own platform, fantasy sports business. We liked it because the multiple, you're looking at a business like that at 3 times revenue. The pure play online operators, you're seeing the likes of Bluebet, PointsBet, they're at 12 times revenue. DraftKings at 20 plus times revenue. So we just thought the sum of parts was very interesting about PlayUp. They've got a real go-getter CEO, also go-getter CEO in the US as well, and thought that the fact that they're there and doing it, and they looked value at the time that we invested, and they've got assets that are important. You need to have that group of assets because every state is different in the US. So you need to have a fantasy sports business, and you need to have your own platform that you can be nimble and change for each state's regulation. We thought it was interesting at the valuation.
Okay. Just saying, are there many US companies as rivals to the likes of BetMakers, of Bluebet, PointsBet, that are better placed to take advantage of the deregulation due to their location or relationships? Is geography a factor?
Yeah, so the thing that's very nice about the Australian operators is that they've got a blueprint of what success looks like in a regulated online wagering market. So it's the likes of Michael Sullivan. He was at the forefront of online betting in the early 2000s. He knows how this plays out. As I mentioned before, Sam Swanell and Johnny Aiken, they're all-star operators. So you've got the talent and the expertise to go over into the US, and I think that's very interesting. The thing that we like about BetMakers is that BetMakers has this unique part of their business. They control fixed odds racing, or dominant in the fixed odds racing on a global scale. And so we think that the US will play out in terms of fixed odds, and we think that BetMakers will play a major part, and they've got something that's unique. In terms of the US, the major players, DraftKings and Penn and MGM, they're all US players, Caesars, and they're interesting. They've got the scale to be able to really compete over the next 5 to 10 years. And then you've got probably the most dominant operator, Flutter, which owns FanDuel, and they've just going gangbusters in terms of their spending. They've got nearly $2 billion in revenue. If you take the half-year results, they'll probably spend $800 million on marketing. So they're very dominant with that FanDuel business there. But their multiple is very different. They're trading at 25 times EBITDA. So you're paying for that dominant player. And I think you don't need to be set in one geography. There's different opportunities across them all. And I think Australia's got a very interesting part to play because we've got the knowledge and expertise.
No rivalry at all?
No, we spend we don't spend a huge amount of time on esports, but the area that we do when we're spending a lot of time speaking to companies is the data providers on the fixed odds pricing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of data providers that provide, like we talked before about Sports Genius, Sports Radar, that are providing fixed odds pricing on sports, NFL, NBA, etc. BetMakers does it on fixed odds racing. There are a lot of providers that provide esports fixed odds pricing to the operators, but not many of them are pricing that accurately, and they haven't got the live feeds. So we think that's an interesting space. It's still very early in the esports because it's not legalized in all the states to bet on esports. And also the value per customer is much lower because it's a younger demographic. So we found in Australia, we had very low cost per acquisition for esports customers, but we didn't have the same value per player from an esports customer. But I think over a 10-year period, it's definitely going to be a major market, and we want to invest in the odds provider because it's the area of it that we understand.
Yeah.